Good. You are recording.
All right. Since we're recording, I'm just going to note here that we're going to take another minute just to make sure, see if we can get Dana in before then. Otherwise, we will start rolling, and hopefully she'll make it in before we get to her section.
Okay, what series, Micah, is the best Star Trek series? There's only one wrong answer.
The best series?
Yeah.
I don't know, there's so many choices. I mean, it's easier if you said Kirk or Picard. I could go with Picard hands down on that, but.
Okay, good.
As
long as you didn't say Captain Archer, because to me, Enterprise is the worst.
That's not Star Trek. That's not Star Trek.
Dracula does not belong in my Star Trek franchise.
Kiddo's off on that one. That might be why they don't like it.
I do enjoy Lower Decks quite a bit. So that's been rising up on my set of favorite Star Trek at the moment, but
so good.
TNG is probably. So.
Yeah, classic. I do feel like Voyager is especially poignant with quarantine. So it's a good one to rewatch right now. For anyone just joining, we just shifted the entire focus of today's meetup to Star Trek. So.
All right. We are going to start. So we'll get rolling, and just hope Dana will join in on before we begin. So first off, thank you all for joining today, and welcome to BayAreaSearch.org's virtual meetup. This is our third one that we've done online now for the quote unquote Bay Area, but welcome for those of you that are outside the area, and just kind of the set of the world of which we're in. I'm Micah Kirshner. I'm the president of Bay Area Search. Andrew, without any video on right now, is the vice president. And in case for whatever reason you're not aware, we are an SF-based, normally an SF-based SEO meetup association, where we usually change our location from one company to another in San Francisco, hosting various SEO meetups every other month. Outside of that, today we are going to be talking about how to handle SEO within enterprise and large organizations. We have for the panel today, we've got Arpana, who is the, I'll make sure I get this right, currently global SEO at Adobe, former SEO at Apple and Google, also my former boss when we worked together back at Become, a comparison shopping engine. We also have Jessica Bowman, who is founder, and I want to say, I don't know what's your official title, CEO, founder of SEO In-House. Handling enterprise level SEO consultancy. Dana, who's currently not here, is also the SEO at Under Armour. Our sponsor today, who helps make a lot of these things possible, is DeepCrawl, handled today as by Ashley Berman Hale, for many of you that knows, who's going to be talking and sponsoring the first little bit about DeepCrawl, specifically. Where's my note here? Give me a second. Pull up my notes. There we go. Specifically with their relatively recent release of DeepCrawl Automator, which does help avoid traffic and revenue loss mitigating some of the risks that introduce often harmful code changes for new releases, particularly think about larger scale and the changes that occur that you might not be aware of. So if you haven't, please do take a look at DeepCrawl's new automator, as well as any of the other general crawling services. So with that in store, I just will start it going. We'll start off with Ashley on her presentation for this.
Sure, I'm going to share my screen. Nope, you've disabled my sharing. How dare you?
Andrew.
Hold on.
I hope so, because it's not going to be nearly as entertaining if you just have to watch me talk about it.
Okay, you should be able to share after.
Thank you, sir. Right. So I want to make this not painful for everyone. I think it's the most important part for me. I know when people come on and they sponsor, it can be awkward. You don't really need to or want to necessarily hear a song and dance about DeepCrawl. The quick one is we're a web crawler. We've been around for a while. We've just got a lot of folks that like data, a lot of data at our hands, and we like to solve tough technical SEO problems. We've been around for a while. We've got a pretty big team, over 100 folks in 3 different countries. I'm the director of the professional services team. There's 9 of us. We're just a ragtag team of individual contributors that like to solve tough SEO issues. And our latest product is Automator. I have slides that I would love to share to anybody. If anybody is interested, I will talk your ear off, but essentially it is an SEO testing tool that plugs into CI/CD systems so that you are testing and then either sending back warnings or rejections to your developers before they push code live. So the idea is to create a system with less risk, save some money, get the developers more bought into some of the SEO basics that could potentially be harmful to what they're building. So I want to talk to you today about how to get SEO done within big businesses. I know that the panelists have far more to offer than I do, but I wanted to just drop in a couple notes rather than just speak about our product, because we do have a team of 9 folks with a lot of deep experience. So I wanted to share the findings that we've had and what's been successful when we work with bigger companies. So the first one is they have to feel a little bit of pain. I try not to be too sadistic, but really people need to understand that SEO is not just marketing, right? It's an important part of their core business functionality. And when there's catastrophic site failures, everybody in the business suffers. So the first thing is just getting that buy-in from the business that this is far more than a marketing channel. It's also important to know that the technical limits or the technical debt on the site limit innovation. And we know that competition never stops moving. You're always at a chance of being left behind. And the biggest discomfort for a lot of business owners is just that users aren't that loyal. Some of them have loyalty, a lot of them don't. What you have to offer in general is offered by at least one other business, sometimes dozens or hundreds other businesses. If your site goes down, or if it's slow, or if it's not accessible on mobile, they're going to stop using you. This is a screenshot I really like to use. It just talks about how technical debt really limits time for developing new things. So as time goes by, this is, we speak directly to tech SEO. So this is really important and near and dear to our heart, but why it's important to have the developers bought in and to have funding from the business to build a platform that's nimble. The next big part, so outside of making it hurt, then you have to come back around and be a human. So it's really important, and we recenter a lot as a team to remember that people built the site. So when you look at a site and when you're critiquing it, it's very important to honor the time that has gone into it and the challenges that people have had in getting it to the space that it is today. Developers build things they want people to use. They are not trying to be antithetical to SEO. They may not know some of the premises that helps their work get into the hands of others, but they've spent time on it and they want people to use it. The second part is really that people use the site. We can't rely too much on data. I wish data did everything in my life. It could maybe do a better job parenting my kids than I can right now, but we have to sometimes take the lens of analysis off and just talk to the people that are using the site or actually try to use it ourselves. Trust that people want to do the right thing. There is often a lot of contention between teams. Sometimes breaking into a bigger company can mean that there are some historical politics that are coming into that, or other tension that you may feel, always give folks the benefit of the doubt. Although I work with a very technical team, we focus a lot on human principles, and just being able to start conversations with larger companies like this have given us a way to make inroads before we even start talking about the technology, and that builds trust. And then hire a diverse team. Personal qualm, but get more women on your team. Get more men on your team if it's women dominated. Get people of color. Please get women of color on your team. People who speak different languages. People whose English is maybe a third or fourth language. People who are older, people who are younger, people who have lived elsewhere in the world. Diversity is going to give you as a business more perspective, and it's going to give your clients an opportunity to attach themselves emotionally to a diverse team if there are more opportunities. I use this with my parenting. So one of my kiddos is sick right now, and COVID is a scary thing. So they're fresh on the mind. And also I don't have a very interesting social life. So I'm going to bring up parenting a bit here, but we call these the 3 C's. And I found out recently that this translates really well to work as well. But if you can keep you and your team feeling curious, confident, and compassionate, that's going to allow you to do the most work. So again, I work for a data-driven company. We have a shitload of really fantastic data, and I can show you how to use that, and amazing tools and reports, and how to drive revenue or discuss revenue. But ultimately, what's most important to me, and what I think moves the needle, especially when talking about how to compete with other agencies directly, is just being a good human. And the most important thing I want to share today is it's 1 week and 5 days to election. You have to vote. If you are able to vote in any way, please do so. If anyone on the call has trouble understanding their voting laws in their state, ping me and I will help you. But this to me right now is far more important than SEO, although I do enjoy my day job. So I will leave it at that. You have some amazing panelists here. I will be on the line. Would love any chats. My Twitter handle was in the presentation, but I'll drop that in chat as well. Always happy to make friends, run crawls for you, or show off technology. Let me know what you need. But either way, I'm just glad to be here. So thank you for letting DeepCrawl sponsor this event.
And thank you so much for being here and helping support the SEO community in turn. Speaking of support and community, I got to put a little bit out there. If you're part of the Bay Area or former Bay Area even, and you want to help out with Bay Area search, whether online or eventually back in person, please let us know. We're happy to take people in the SEO world from any walks of life. I do SEO kind of in-house at Turner River Capital. Andrew works and runs his own agency, as well as many of our other folks, such as Hale, who's on the call, who's currently was at Macy's here in SF and is now at Sears in, I want to say Kentucky. Please correct me please berate me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe now over in Kentucky. So outside of that, I'll get started and talk to our panelists for the day. We may pull up Hale actually as well if we don't see Dana coming in shortly. Start off the bat, Arpana. And please feel free for the rest of the panels to jump in as well separately from any of these questions if you have additionally other things to add. But I want to start with you. Right off the bat, large companies, you've been out in multiple walks of doing SEO. How are you selling SEO internally to those in the organization and specifically to executives?
A lot of experience there, and I think some things that you may have already heard goes back to the core. I want to start out by also adding to what Ashley shared, the curious, confident, compassionate. It's a great starting point. I would add to that conviction. And I think that's where I want to start out saying, when you're at an enterprise, a larger company, the why is very important. And behind the why, the conviction, if you truly believe that that's the right thing to do and the product is valuable, I think that's the other key for me. The conviction comes from users are really looking for it. There is a need. there's a reason why we want to be out there. So to me, that's the core, the why, the conviction of we need to get this out to people who are looking to discover. And so really understanding from there, the user need, the business need, there's a reason that you and your team were hired, and really getting to the core of being curious to understand what that is, then getting to the what. Like understanding where the phase, the company, what phase is it in? Is it foundational? Is it in a growth stage? And from that point, catering your how, which is what is your strategy going to be? Because your strategy is not going to stick, especially with execs, if it's in a growth stage and you go in and you say you're going to have 1 to 2% or a 5% the next year or the next 5 years. If they're in a growth stage, then you want to speak their language. If it's in already doing really well, then you want to talk about the potential risk if you were to lose that traffic. So again, catering your strategy to what is it that the company is looking for and why they brought you in. And then I think the ask. After the what is it that you need to do, it's always going to be, okay, so how can we 10x that number, especially with large companies? You always hear that, the number you've put out is too conservative. If we went all in, what would that look like? And so that's where you want to have an ask in terms of an operating plan. If you were to realistically get to that large number, what would it take? And when a company is deciding, especially large companies, they've got a lot of options in front of them in terms of the projects that they could be undertaking to get that growth, to get the new customers. And for them to have to pick one over the other, it either has to be synergistic with their current strategy and the direction of where they're going, or it has to be really a big growth. So that's where, again, really understanding what is realistic, but putting out what is the best case scenario with an operating plan, because especially execs want to know how you're going to get there. They've all heard that SEO can do great things, but they also want to make sure that it's realistic. They don't just want a number, they want a clear path. And the more you've researched the company, spoken with the existing team out there, your stakeholders, that will give you a sense of what are the landmines, what are the potential blockers where you're not going to be able to overcome them in such a short time frame. So then you'll be realistic about the time frame in which you're going to be able to get where you have to. And then promise deliverables. So show the path, not just the final end goal, but what is it going to look like? In 30 days, I can come back to you with a small win. In 60 days, I can come back to you with some leading indicators. These are the KPIs we are going to track. Depending on where the company is in its phase, having the 30, 60, 90 day, and then the 6 month and annual goals. And with SEO, I've never seen a place where it's a 1 year. It's always multi-year, just because of the time it takes for the large organization to rally behind something, then to go implement that, and then to actually start seeing the results as Google calibrates it.
Cool. So you've put everything out there. You've explained what you're going for. How do you get around that one person? And there's always this one obstinate person in the company that just doesn't think SEO matters, or kind of downplays it or pushes back repeatedly. How do you get around that kind of person?
It's invariably something either historically that person has certain beliefs. So it's always about understanding. And while that does seem like, it's a simple thing, but really getting to the bottom of why is that the case? What are your objections? Why would a team or a person not want to think about cost savings, which is, going back to the foundation of SEO? What does SEO help with? It's discoverability. I think most people I've encountered who don't feel positive about SEO is either their experience or their belief that it's spam, or it's trying to manipulate the engines. And I think that's where coming out with a very realistic expectation of here's what's in it for the business, here's what's in it for your team, And that's where understanding the team, I think, what is their team? Are they from a comms team? Is it from a marketing team, which is very concerned about SEO going in and stuffing keywords? Or is it about a design team that's really cautious about how they design the page and SEO coming in and, you know, overtaking that? And so I think that's where always highlighting why SEO intrinsically is good. It's not just about the traffic. It's about a better user experience, and it's about connecting the business to its most core customers. So that's what I've found time and again has worked.
I'm kind of remiss on this, so I should note is that if there are any questions that the attendees here have, please feel free to ask them. We have I believe you have access to a Q&A button to ask. If not, just type them in the chat. We'll get to them at a later point as well. Okay, so for people who are newly going into an enterprise level business, what is kind of the difference of what you're focusing on when it comes to smaller, medium scale sites to an actual enterprise business? What is something uniquely different that you're doing as an SEO comparatively?
The scale, so first understanding what's the difference, and it comes in many forms. It comes in terms of the technology, it comes in terms of the people, it comes in terms of the stakeholders. So looking at it from all of those areas, and invariably it's about scale and it's about complexity. On the positive side, you could have a much greater impact, but on the downside, it's also going to be that much more complex to start the machine. So those are the two critical areas to really be thinking about. Realistic expectations in terms of how long it is going to take to turn something big, and then not having to promise just really small results, because then you won't get traction, especially across teams. For something that has to be tackled at a matrix level in a large organization, teams are not going to rally behind it if it's a small number. So I think that's where both those things come in. Plan for scale, plan for complexity.
And along the line of gaining traction, switching from growth numbers to team, when and how is it appropriate to start working towards expanding your team? As kind of a head of SEO, saying, I need these people to help me in my role to grow the business further. What is it that you do to essentially work and expand on that?
I think my personal preference has been understand the lay of the land first. There's a reason why the team is structured a certain way, and going in right away to make a change, and especially growing it, can sometimes be counterproductive, because you can bring on people without knowing what where you want to slot them in. So you really want to have the framework, the strategy, where you want to go before you figure out what are the right leads to put in each of those spots. Also, you want to understand where are the gaps, because each company, each organization is going to have their core strengths, their competitive advantage, and their gaps. And understanding whether the technology stack is something which is lacking, or that could be improved, or is it the velocity or the content creation? Where is the gap, and where do you need if you are growing the team, which expertise do you need to come in and drive a newer area, versus there may be things that are already functioning well, you keep those going. And it's always a process. You don't want to change, especially with SEO, given the amount of stake there is, the risk is very high. In most companies, SEO makes up a pretty large proportion of the traffic. So changing anything and causing that drop is the worst thing that you could come in and do. I think it's more about, while you don't get rewarded for preserving, but that's a huge thing. You want to preserve and then grow from that base.
Cool. Good point. So switching over, Jessica, whether joining or you're auditing kind of that enterprise level company, and you're finding issues, what is usually, or finding things that are missing, what is the first thing you ask for when you either join or audit the company?
So I ask for a few things. I want to know about the technology stack that's being applied to the website. So, when I go in to look at a new website, I want to know how many platforms are there. And an enterprise level, it's not uncommon to have multiple CMSs running one single website. So I want to know all of those, so we make sure we look at certain things with every platform. We're also looking at kind of what templates are there and how many code bases for those templates. So I have a client where we just audited their website, and you think, oh, product category grid page. And we found some very peculiar things that were showing up, but when we would test pages, it wasn't an issue on those pages we were looking at. But like the crawl data and stuff like that was showing something different versus when we spot checked. And it turns out they have multiple different grid page templates for each of the different CMS platforms. And there were more CMS platforms than what we realized. So you really need to know, like, how many code bases are there that generate any specific template, because one of those versions was introducing HTTP on the website. It generated the most pages, and suddenly the site was being indexed on HTTP occasionally, far too often. So, one little mistake can create a lot of problems. So you want to know, how many code bases there are. And a lot of times I'm brought in, well, I do a lot of audits. A lot of times I'm brought in to look at the operations as well. Kind of how do we improve SEO operationally, not just through our tactics, in essence, in how we're going about executing on all of these tactics. So I always want to know, my most important teams are developers, merchandisers, and I would say writers. Those are probably my three most important teams to work with, though we typically work with everyone in your entire organization that touches the website. But hands down, those are the ones that usually create the most problems in an enterprise level environment. Yeah, I see some smiles, so you can relate to that. And then the last kind of chunk I'm looking at, and this goes back to the operational side, but also that, implementation of tactics. There's certain things I want to get SEO into. So whether I am, in essence, an acting SEO lead for a temporary, like, interim period of time, or I'm kind of opening doors for the SEO team because they brought me in to work with operations, I want to know about prioritization meetings. What are they? How many are they? Who's involved in them? The scheduling of releases, or the editorial calendar scheduling. I want to know what's involved in that. What does that process look like? Because we need to get SEO into that. Same with those prioritization meetings. We want to get SEO in at the seat at the table. I want to know about content reviews. Now, obviously, content reviews for like product detail pages, not scalable for the SEO team to do, but I want to integrate some SEO processes in that. I want to know, when we're launching new pages, how do we get SEO into that workflow for the new projects or new pages? And one thing that I rarely see enterprise SEOs doing, but I think is so vital, and that is technical SEO QA testing. So a lot of SEO managers don't really have a lot of technical expertise. But then even if they do have it, they're QA testing far too late in the process. I love to get SEO in unit testing. And most enterprise SEOs don't even know what that is. But that's when a developer codes and then they say, okay, I'm done. They do the testing kind of on their own box for the code that they wrote. I like, for anything complicated, I like to get SEO into that. And my process is always to flag when I want to be involved in SEO, in unit testing, I flag that in the ticket. So those are just kind of a few things when I'm going into a company.
Would that be one of the crucial tools that you look for enterprise level, or are there some other ones in particular that you are always making sure is there in place?
Yeah, so tools. So that unit testing thing, there's really not a lot of like QA testing tools. It's more about using the SEO tools and knowing how to interpret the data. But the tools that I think you need, I'm actually not a big toolbox junkie. I think a lot of companies overbuy in tools. I think a lot of them buy these big expensive tools that they're just not ready for. Even large enterprise level companies, you have to have your SEO program at a certain level of maturity to justify the cost of some of those. And oftentimes I think that, you know, some of the lesser expensive tools will do good enough job until you've implemented a certain amount of work, and then those tools can start working for you. So I find companies often buy those about 1 to 3 years too early. And so they're just kind of wasting a lot of money. So I think that when it comes to tools, when I did prep that one, I gave it a lot of thought because I don't really advocate a ton of tools. One of them is a site crawler. So Screaming Frog is a common one. It's not really scalable for an enterprise level. So DeepCrawl is definitely an awesome tool for enterprise companies. So I think that one should be on everybody's tool kind of list to check out. Obviously, Search Console is an awesome tool, but I'm an advocate of giving access to that to others in the organization. So especially anyone that needs to do keyword research, I often find that to be a really simplistic tool. So it's kind of hard to kind of mess up too much. So I like that tool, and I train a lot of companies. We end up, when we pull together kind of what does their toolkit look like for non-SEO teams, that's one of them. The Moz Toolbar, I'm a big fan of that one for keyword research, especially for some of those non-SEO teams. I do think we all need that typical rank tracker tool. And then when you get more mature in your program, and this has nothing to do with skills, you could be the most senior SEO guy out there, but you don't typically have time to dig into a lot of tools. But when you start getting things on wheels and other teams are doing stuff for SEO, and it's not just you as the SEO team, I like tools like Botify or OnCrawl that'll actually look at crawl behavior. So I think that's a really nice suite. I see some other ancillary tools people use like Ahrefs and SEMrush. So I think there are definitely some other tools to look at, but I find that sometimes companies overinvest in tools and underinvest in operations.
So along kind of some of the similar lines with that, going from tools to pulling in a third party, when is it right then to pull in maybe not a tool vendor, but a third party to help with in-house SEO?
Yeah, so I think the obvious is you don't have time to do it, right? There comes a point where you're like, I've got all these projects that are coming that I didn't generate, but I have to be involved in. And yet we need SEO training. We need to look at our operations, right? That's the most obvious time to bring someone in. So that's oftentimes when I get brought in. People start to realize the best return on my energy as the kind of SEO manager or director of SEO is not preparing training decks. It's working on these projects that are going out the door to actually make the cash register ring. So I get brought in for that. I think there's also the obvious when you have a short-term need and a complex problem, right? A big migration, a lot of simultaneous projects, a complex project, right? So maybe it's not a migration, but you're launching some great new functionality. That's another good one. I think a lot of times it's just you really already have a full plate.
Yeah, I personally as well have used it for third-party validation in particular.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm a big fan of bringing someone in. I think the best SEO teams I see out there, they bring in someone to do an audit once a year or every other year. And they do a big kind of audit of the site to really understand what did we miss, but also to be that third party validation of problems. You know, I have one client, they kind of SEO was doing well, and then it dropped for a few years. It kind of moved around in the organization, and they brought me back in after 8 years. and said, we lost what you built for us, Jessica. We need you to come back and rebuild that for us. So I think there's some times when SEO kind of goes ups and downs depending on who's at the helm over the years.
So how are you justifying all the budget for that? Like what, training, tools, audits, all this stuff. How can we actually justify that?
Yeah. So I have, and if anyone wants these and slides, I've got some slides that I send out to people, and they've actually used this to get budget. Like one woman told me this worked really well. She kind of designed her presentation around the order of the way I had things in these recommendations that I sent her. But here are just kind of some high level examples. So the first thing, like in my book, I talk about enterprise level companies. They're usually not struggling with a few problems. They are dying a death of 1,000 paper cuts. So when you look at the problem in isolation, it's not that big of a deal, right? Okay, we accidentally put the HTTP in the canonical tag. But when you expand that across all the URLs that template generates, it created a problem, right? So an enterprise level, it's like little things that are adding up. Or sometimes it's, oh, we don't have, this thing in place. We don't have our, I don't know, I can't think of anything at the top of my head, but something small. And in isolation, it's not big, but it's like a lot of those problems are a portfolio of issues that are adding up to a problem. So that's what I see. So what I want you to do is take examples of problems. So you've got your portfolio of kind of paper cuts, but then you also have example issues of what happened. For example, these are things that have actually happened to our clients. A developer moved the CSS file to robots.txt during the peak holiday season. So Google thought that kind of the site was ugly, right? Traffic tanked in that country. They had no idea until months after the new year. A merchandiser renamed a link actually right before the holiday season. In the navigation, traffic tanked for that category. They didn't understand why until they figured out, oh, the navigation changed. At that point, it was code freeze. You couldn't change anything. They had another client, A/B testing was about to remove a lot of text because it doesn't generate revenue. So think about all these like things and keep a list. I had a boss one time that called them the Hall of Shame. So keep your Hall of Shame list. And then you take all that and you quantify, what if these had gone wrong? This is what I caught in only 6 months' time. And you want to talk to them and talk to the executives and say, hey, look, this was worth about X million dollars of revenue loss potentially, maybe give a bandwidth and say, it's going to get bigger because we're just growing and creating more problems on the site. Next time it could have one change, bigger impact. And so I also like to show like why you can't rank. Tell them the money left on the table. That's the most important thing, right? This is the loss. This is the money on the table. And then I want you to try and quantify the opportunity loss because you're fixing all these problems that other teams were introducing. And suddenly this starts to add up to a really, really, really big number, right? So that's what I want you to think about. And then you talk about, you need that, cohesive knowledge set company-wide. And you just kind of go through this and it really wakes the executives up to understand, okay, I get it. Because a lot of them think the SEO team does SEO. They don't realize it's everyone else in the organization that has to do the SEO. And so that's where I think a lot of SEO managers, when they pitch for this, they're not portraying the full picture, right? When they're looking at the lift, they're not really portraying the true cost or opportunity, right? So they're really kind of reporting a lower number in many cases. And then make sure that you address the time challenge. So there's 2 time challenges. One is the SEO team's time challenge to do the work that you're trying to outsource. They don't have time for that. And you also have to address the time challenge of teams needing to be out of the job for training. So usually when you get through all those points, they wake up and understand, this needs to happen, and I see how it can happen because your training plan accounts for how to bring everyone on board.
Cool.
Did I miss anything on that?
I like your, I liked your Hall of Shame one. I usually just call it like fallback options, but I think I might steal that as a phrase in some best practice documents. So, so we're bringing up Holly from our board. She's former SEO at Macy's and now currently at Sears. So she's as well got some enterprise level SEO experience here. So thank you, Holly, for stepping in.
Sure.
Throw you to the fire with some questions in preparation.
I do have to preface, so, you know, this is actually not cleared by legal, so don't get me fired. I'm actually the SEO manager for SearsPartsDirect.com. So go get your water filters for your refrigerators, your lawn blower, your lawn, lawn care items, all the parts and appliances business. So yeah, really exciting business unit to be working on. But everything that I will be able to share today will relate to my time at Macy's as an SEO product manager. So just to preface.
Fair enough. So just to reiterate, anything you hear is Macy's or earlier, nothing around Sears. Great. So we're talking about just recently now with kind of the risk of other teams. What about the risk and benefits that you make for SEO changes? And how are you forecasting the monetary value of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to echo everything that, Arpana and Jessica said earlier, some really good points. For a lot of the work that I did at Macy's, we took all of the SEO data and tried to put that together, took it to the finance team and ran them through the numbers, but also ran them through, we humanized the problem as well so they could get more context around what was going on. But I felt like that was a really great way to always make sure that each of our SEO initiatives had a financial benefit behind them. And we were pretty conservative, but I think, to Arpana's point, we don't get points for the maintenance of our site. We get points for growth. So we really tried to work with our financial partners to understand, how we could take this to the enterprise level and at least 5x it from a conservative standpoint, because you have to realize there's a time limit to getting things done. But if you can get it done, the ROI, the financial ROI that's behind it can be really exciting.
So you were kind of product and SEO. So you spent time trying to justify and explain the value of SEO to other teams. So how do you explain it specifically to very niche teams about why SEO matters to them? So like, how are you explaining to dev folks that own the log servers, or to those that manage a help desk or the security team and so forth? How are you going to them and saying why this matters?
That's a really good point. Actually, we did a lot of listening to customer call center calls. So we were able to really humanize the issue as well and kind of help connect the dots and tell people, this issue wouldn't be an issue if we could provide this data to this team. It's a little difficult for people to understand, why Googlebot needs to know something. But when you can get at least to that level of data and just, provide it as a fact and say, this is what the bots need to be able to see, and this is what the user needs to be able to do. And with those two things happening, concurrently, then we're going to have a lot more success going on. We're not going to have, a leaky bucket, so to speak. So you try to just, I love the way Arpana put it earlier, just humanize, the issue that's going on and be very clear about the data sets that need to get communicated to the right people and the right pieces of the puzzle. And that's one way to certainly approach it.
Okay, so I want to throw in one of my kind of questions in here, because this is one of the things I've run across often, and I'm presuming others have too, which is how do you balance a change to kind of the UX design, often through, say, a CRO kind of testing that will usually differ from what you want with SEO goals. So to give one of many examples, often a lot of the CRO testing will say, hey, fewer navigational links or body copy links means we will have more conversions, whether it's demos or actual transactional conversions. So how do you handle that balance to kind of get across the potential damage on the SEO side that may offset, plus minus with CRO?
Yeah, absolutely. You're constantly making those types of trade-offs, especially on large enterprise sites, because as Jessica mentioned, the problem, a small problem gets exacerbated across many, many pages. Really, the revenue is always going to win. And, especially coming from Macy's, which was a heavy e-commerce site, we always wanted to protect the add to cart feature. So a lot of times SEO did kind of have to, take a back seat to things. But what I usually tried to advise, from the product standpoint was, let's just make the user experience as seamless as possible so that we can get the conversion rate up as high as we can. If, we have to do without some links on the page, it's okay. But ultimately, we're not working for a charity, we're working for a business, and, the revenue is important, and CRO is important. So those are the things we really want to make sure are happening on certain pages. And sometimes those trade-offs are just going to have to happen.
Okay. I wanted to let Jessica show her, she's got a little slide here to show of her template for what she uses to calculate lift for changes.
Yeah.
So let's switch it over, just kind of go through that.
Yes, okay.
And as Jessica brings that up, wanted to add one thing to what Holly was sharing. In terms of the conversion rate optimization, always ask for testing and ask for proof, because there'll be a lot of people who'll say, I did this at so-and-so place and having a large CTA is going to really work. But user behaviors change. Each use case is different. So that's where, Holly, going back to your point, it's just ask for that testing.
All right. Can you see the slide and
Yeah.
presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep,
All right, great. So this is just a very simple template that we use to estimate lift. It is not complex, but sometimes just having something to start with makes it easier. So I know, I remember earlier in my career, I struggled with how to get my mind around this. And so this is just a simple example. So what we do is we chunk things out into portfolios of problems. And product managers understand this concept of a portfolio of issues that need fixed, and that it's not about the one change or the two change. Because I've worked over the years with lots of product managers about trying to estimate tickets, and I say we can't. It's a collection of problems that's creating the problem. And they said, oh, a portfolio of problems. So now we just organize these as a portfolio of problems to fix. And everyone seems to get this concept. So what we do is we kind of organize the portfolio of issues. And then I just kind of at a high level wrote the change. This is what page in the audit is. And that's not filled out in the orange rows, but the rows underneath. Just kind of the impact, where it's going to be impacting on the site. So is it site-wide? Is it only this template? Is it only this directory? Is it only this business division? And that helps people get their mind around, this is not a site-wide lift. This only is going to affect this chunk of the business. But also it's good for when it comes time to calculate the lift. Like you need to know, okay, of the pages that we're going to address in the international portfolio, which section of the site do I use to run my metrics on? So that's kind of how I use it. We estimate the low or high. Don't use these numbers. They were just kind of very roughly plugged in. I also think these numbers change depending on the complexity of your issues and your site traffic. So, if you're getting $1 billion in SEO revenue, your lift is going to be much lower than if you're probably getting, a few million of SEO revenue a year. And then, so then we have the next column is current traffic. And then these are just formulas where we estimate the high, we estimate the low based on the traffic and the low and high percentages. So again, it's just a simplistic worksheet that just helps you map out where this lift is coming from. And so this is traffic in the dark gray. In the light gray, it goes high revenue. And then the last column is just where you put notes for how do you identify these pages in analytics. If you're lucky, you'll have an analytics team that can help you. So now what goes in the expansions, because I've got the spreadsheet collapsed. So when we look at the expansions, this is where we'll just have another like mini portfolio. Okay, everything related to canonical tags and HTTPS. Here are the issues. Here's where you'll find it at in the audit. Here is the impact we're going to have on each of those changes. And then, you know, here's another one I was able to show you kind of an example on. This one was pretty simple. Hygiene, trim the fat, right? They just had a lot of pages in there that needed to be removed. And so we just kind of put this stuff in. They were the action items flagged in our audit. And then we say the mini page, the audit page, and then the impact. And again, this is where we can start calculating the risk, and people can kind of expand and collapse and understand to get their mind around how that lift is calculated and what's really involved in that. So if you want that template, you can email me at hi@seoinhouse.com. I'll send that to you, or more just stuff on building that business case as well. So.
Hey,
I thought that would be
Jessica,
useful, so hopefully it was.
It is. I think that's interesting. Do you also do a crawl to understand, as you mentioned, like the depth of the directory, how many pages you're actually talking about? Do you kind of put that as a quantifiable metric too, so you can look at the lift and estimate
so it's
high,
usually
medium,
in
low?
the audit, like how many pages have this issue would be these pages. Now, quantifying like, okay, these pages, what's their traffic in that lift? You know, you could spend 5 months just calculating your lift. So at some point, you just kind of have to do a little bit of fuzzy math in there and analytics, but we absolutely do. So we'll go in our audits, because we've done a crawl on the site, and say, okay, you have 5,000 pages that have this /tab1 showing up, and it's just duplicate content, right? So you're wasting your crawl and processing budget on these URLs that aren't even needed. And how do they get there? Oh, you put this one little expander, and that's the URL in the expander. So they're crawling that, so things like that.
Yeah, definitely. No, a really good resource. For the low price of $49.99, Jessica will provide it to you.
Yeah, I'm even cheaper than Holly. I'm free. I'll send it to you guys for free. So in-house or hi@seoinhouse.com. I'll get that to you.
Great. So we have about 5 minutes left. I want to open up the floor to any of the attendees if they have questions they'd like to ask. And of course, if any of the panelists in turn have questions or things they want to highlight, feel free right now.
And we still didn't get Dana? I was really looking forward to having her contribute. Aw, she's lovely. I got to have dinner with her actually at, wait, when was the last time we were all able to be together in person? SMX in San Jose. I saw you too, Jessica. I saw you there.
You, Holly.
Yeah.
Congrats on yours.
Thank you. I was like, when were we all last able to be out in public? Well, while we're waiting for some questions, something that Jessica, you mentioned that triggered something for me, where you were talking about the QA process and, validating everything that's going into, the tickets and going to be released. Having developers show you and validate that the changes are in the DOM and the source code, and that there is parity between the two is really essential. I've certainly found different releases from different teams can, break things that other teams have developed in other branches and they didn't realize. Just things can happen. And, so certainly,
I talk about unit testing, and that's one place you need to be, but even in that same release, one developer can break what you tested. Yep. So I also like to be, I didn't mention this one, so it's a bonus. I also like to be in the code checks. So not many SEO managers actually get into the code checks. So that's something like, if you don't have that skill, that's a good thing to outsource. Like, you don't have to be in-house to be on top of the technical SEO changes and be in those code check meetings and that sort of thing. So definitely try and get in those meetings. They're good.
Shameless plug for our tool that does just that, because that's the thing, like you shouldn't have to necessarily know how to do regression testing in prod and dev environments in order to be a really effective SEO. So if you can find a way to insert yourself in a way that doesn't drive developers crazy,
Yeah.
because we know that there are
True.
relationships, that's a really nice way to do it, and it gives them more control over their code rather than them pushing something and you coming back and knocking on the door later being like, oh my god, you broke everything.
There's another cool tool. I don't think DeepCrawl does this, so I'll mention it. I'm so sorry if you do it.
Oh
also.
no, honestly,
Holly talked
if I
about
could buy
like
you a beer, I would do you that. That's all we need. So please
So
tell me
how
all the good tools.
developers can change your fixes that you put in for SEO. So there's a tool called SEO Radar, and what they do, they monitor your code for any changes that happen, so that you can always be, as soon as the change happens, you can go look at it and to say, does it impact SEO in any way? And so that's a great way to stay on top of it. I think that would probably be like a vital tool for someone who does not have dev working with you. Like they won't let you do anything. They won't pull you in, and they're always making mistakes. Like that is the Band-Aid of all Band-Aids.
A code nanny, I love it.
Yeah, a code nanny, great way of thinking.
Now I gotta go see if we can build something. That's really
you
good.
need to build a code nanny.
We need a code nanny.
That's a great name.
I have a question if we have a minute here for our other panelists. I hear a lot about log files and how difficult those can be. Do you ladies have any tools, any resources for getting your hands on those types of files? No? Or Ashley, maybe?
I mean, this is why someone else should have the power to mute me, because I have something to everything. Sorry. So I think log files are moderately overrated in their raw form. They're difficult to get. It's not just one source of truth. Depending on where you are in the server stack, you're going to get different data. I think you get yourself a log file analyzer, and really what they're doing is ingesting data and telling you useful bits. If you have that information, I think that you can make a good impact. But if you're not comfortable with raw logs, raw log files, just don't drive yourself crazy. At DeepCrawl, we don't actually do log file analysis. We just ingest the data and then blend it with other crawl data, because it's interesting for us to see where bots are going that may or may not be crawlable, or which pages are being hit. But log files are very, very cool, but you will waste a year of your life, and you may not need to for the type of impact that you want to have. Although again, very cool, very hip thing to do on a Friday night. Invite me to that party. Just you don't always have to attend.
Yeah, plus one to that, it's usually a response to something that you're seeing, and that becomes big. But even then, you don't want to have to scramble at that point. So you do want to have someone on your team who at least has access. So you want to know who are the devs who might be able to pull that really quickly, versus having to have an issue and then go scrambling to look for it.
Jamie Alberico has a really good presentation on all the different places to get log files and what can go wrong at each point, that maybe we can harass her to share. I think she's done a deep dive on all the ways to get log files internally if you're in-house, which is a wild journey.
Those of you who don't have the skills for that or can't get to them, don't sweat it. I've been in enterprise SEO since 2002, and I don't think any company I've ever worked with would give us access to their log files. They were just too big. Anything that was possibly transferable was so small that it wasn't even statistically relevant. So I think maybe that's where the tools that can help you come into play. So don't sweat it. I'm saying they're really good. Like Arpana was right. When you have an issue, it's good to dig into it, but don't sweat it if you can't get into it. You can still do awesome SEO without it. I think I've had to do that for my entire career. Nobody would actually, dev would never release them because they were just too big.
Yeah. Or called DeepCrawl.
Yeah.
I mean, just because.
Great. Well,
sorry, Micah, I did include that presentation in the chat, and slide 21, it starts at 19, but there's a slide 21 that shows you all the different places you could potentially get log files. So you have the right words to ask teams internally if you don't have that close relationship, and that might be useful.
Great resource, Ashley.
Great. So I want to say thank you all for everyone who's come for the meetup today. I want to give an additional shout out to Uli, part of our team who helped to pull our panelists together, make sure kind of to check in and see everything was set up and ready to go. Outside of that, we're going to open the floor up. We're going to stop the recording. We'll have kind of an after hours. If you can stay, great. If not, again, thank you for coming. We'll just be talking about stuff off unofficially and everything else from that. So thank you again. And Andrew, wherever you are, please feel free to end the recording, and hopefully we'll see you at our next one.
Recording's ended. Attendees now are allowed to unmute themselves, I believe.
I can now just walk away backwards, flipping everyone off. Is that what happened?
I still see the recording up in the top left, so
Oh, geez.
I'll wait for a second.